Welcome to Life Stories. Imagine standing at the edge of everything you've worked for, surrounded by the people who've spent years belittling you, and realizing they've never seen you for who you really are. For Eliza, the moment she chose to reveal her secret success, she didn't just shock her family, she shattered the illusion they had built around her. But the truth comes with a price. As she battles to protect her grandmother's legacy, the line between family loyalty and personal ambition becomes dangerously thin. Will she preserve the past or risk losing everything to build a future? Stay with us as Eliza steps into a world where nothing is as it seems, and every decision could change her life forever. Eliza Morgan stepped out of her aging Toyota, a quiet sigh escaping her lips as she gazed up at the sprawling, ivy-clad facade of the Morgan family estate. The mansion stood as a monument to everything she had always wanted to escape, and everything she had come to loathe. The vast stone steps leading up to the front door had witnessed too many generations of pride and privilege, their polished surfaces worn by the relentless march of time and wealth. Yet, to Eliza, the mansion felt like a gilded cage, a place of memories, both comforting and suffocating. It was here that she had lived as a young girl after losing both parents in a tragic accident. And now, 10 years later, it felt more like a tomb, a place where the living had all but forgotten how to honor the dead. The voices of her relatives echoed through the grand hall before she even set foot inside. Laughter, clinking glasses, and the sharp hum of high-end conversations about yachts, vacations, and luxury investments. They didn't know she had arrived yet. She liked it that way. Her cousins, Brad, Veronica, and Tyler, would no doubt be huddled in their usual corner, talking about the latest status symbols they'd collected. The cars, the watches, the homes. None of it mattered to Eliza. She had never been interested in the kind of wealth they worshipped. But she was also tired of pretending that her modest life, her simple wardrobe, her unpretentious car, was anything but a calculated choice. Her grandmother, Evelyn Morgan, had taught her that true wealth was invisible. It wasn't about what you wore or what you drove. It was about creating security, opportunity, and a legacy. But Evelyn was gone now, leaving Eliza to fend for herself in a family that had always viewed her as the poor relation, a charity case after her parents' death. And yet, Eliza had spent the past decade building her empire quietly carefully, without anyone's help, without even so much as a whisper of recognition. She had listened to her grandmother's voice in her head, guiding her through every investment, every decision. Eliza had invested in undervalued properties, turned her modest inheritance into something substantial. And now her portfolio was worth more than she cared to admit. But there was one thing her family would never know, until today. Eliza was no fool. She knew her Uncle Jack, the self-appointed patriarch of the Morgan family, had already planned to sell the mansion. He had always believed that the property was a burden, a relic of the past. But to Eliza, this was more than just a house. It was the last remaining piece of Evelyn's legacy, the place where her grandmother had imparted every lesson Eliza had used to build her fortune. The mansion was Evelyn's vision, a quiet, thoughtful place where wealth wasn't flaunted, but used for something greater than personal gain. And Jack, with his obsession with status, was about to destroy it. The family conference was set to begin in a few hours, and Eliza knew that Jack would try to push through the sale. He had already made arrangements with developers to tear down the mansion and build luxury condominiums. The irony wasn't lost on her. He was going to sell their family history to make room for more opulence. Her cousins, all of them, would line up to vote in favor of the sale. Brad would love the idea of having a cut of the profits for his latest vacation home. Veronica would see it as an opportunity to redevelop the land and add more luxury properties to her portfolio. Tyler, ever the opportunist, would likely use it as leverage for his own career advancement. None of them understood the true meaning of the legacy they were so quick to discard. As Eliza walked through the halls, she could hear the faint sound of her cousin Brad boasting about his latest acquisition. A brand new Maserati, of course, parked outside. The conversation would be the same as always: how much money they'd made, how many properties they owned, how many vacations they had taken. But none of it was real. None of it had meaning. Eliza had learned that lesson the hard way. When she entered the grand dining room, her family was already seated, waiting for her to arrive. She had never felt more out of place. Her modest navy blazer, an understated symbol of everything she had worked for, was met with sideways glances and whispered comments. It didn't matter. She wasn't there for their approval anymore. She was here to protect what her grandmother had left behind. Evelyn had always believed in the power of patience. It was time to put that belief to the test. Jack started the meeting with his usual grandiose speech about expanding the family holdings, talking about the family image, and how the mansion no longer fit into their plans for growth. Eliza could feel the tension in the room. This wasn't just about the mansion. It was about control, about power. The family's wealth, once built on wisdom and prudence, had been hijacked by those who only cared about appearances. But today, Eliza would change that. When the topic turned to the mansion, Eliza raised her hand. The room fell silent. She could feel every eye on her, judging, waiting for her to fail. But she was ready. She spoke calmly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I think we need to consider Evelyn's wishes," she said. This house was more than just a property to her. It was the foundation of everything she believed in. She would never have wanted it sold for profit. Jack's face twisted in irritation. "We've moved past sentimentality, Eliza. The market has changed. We can't hold on to this old place just because it has memories attached to it." "That's exactly why it matters," Eliza countered. "The value of this house isn't just in its bricks and mortar, it's in the legacy it holds. And that's worth more than any luxury condo." The room grew tense, but Eliza wasn't backing down. She had prepared for this moment. As Jack continued to argue, Eliza could feel the weight of her decisions, the truth that had been hidden from her family for so long, ready to spill out. And then, in the quiet of that moment, Eliza revealed her secret, her portfolio. A portfolio that had quietly outgrown all of theirs combined. A portfolio worth over $70 million, built on the very principles Evelyn had instilled in her. It was more than just real estate. It was a silent rebellion against everything her family held dear. Have you ever been underestimated by your family, only to prove them wrong in a way that changed everything? What would you do if you had the power to rewrite your family's future, but only at the cost of your own peace? As Eliza placed the documents on the table, the room went still. The true scale of her wealth hit them like a tidal wave. But it wasn't just the money, it was the message. Eliza was not the poor relation anymore. She was the one who had built something real. And now her family would have to reckon with that. They hadn't just underestimated her, they had underestimated the depth of her commitment to Evelyn's legacy. And now the mansion wasn't just her inheritance, it was her battleground. The silence in the room was suffocating. Eliza watched as her family absorbed the magnitude of her revelation. Her wealth, her success, everything they had mocked her for now laid bare in front of them. But there was something else in the air, something deeper than just shock. It was the shift in power, the subtle crack in the veneer of their superiority. For the first time in her life, they were looking at her, not as the outsider, the poor cousin, but as someone who had built something far greater than they had imagined. But even in this moment of victory, Eliza felt a creeping unease, a gnawing sensation at the pit of her stomach. She had wanted to prove herself, to show them that she was more than their dismissive comments and condescending pity. She had achieved that, but at what cost? The relief she had anticipated felt strangely hollow. Her family, the ones who had shaped her world with their judgment and disdain, were now staring at her with wide eyes, some with respect, others with bitterness. There was no celebration, no congratulations, just an uncomfortable silence and the sharp sting of their wounded pride. Uncle Jack's face was a study in disbelief, his mouth open in an almost comical expression of shock. Brad, for all his bravado, was suddenly quieter than he had ever been, his usual smirk replaced with something closer to unease. Veronica's eyes, sharp and calculating, flicked between the documents Eliza had placed on the table and the other family members, as if trying to assess how best to navigate this new, uncomfortable reality. But it was Aunt Catherine who broke the silence first. "You've done well, Eliza," she said, her voice strained, "but this is not what Evelyn would have wanted. We can't just tear down everything we've built for some new idea of success." Eliza's heart skipped a beat at the mention of her grandmother's name. Evelyn, her guide, her mentor, the woman who had taught her the meaning of true wealth, not the empty display of it that consumed her family. For a moment, Eliza thought she might crumble. The image of her grandmother, warm and wise, seemed to flicker in her mind. Evelyn would never have approved of this confrontation, of the division that had grown between them. But then, Eliza realized, this wasn't about her grandmother's approval anymore. It was about honoring the values that Evelyn had instilled in her, values that had nothing to do with the surface, with the glitz and glamour her family so dearly prized. But the weight of her family's judgment, the way they suddenly saw her as both an outsider and a threat, weighed heavily on her chest. What if this wasn't the victory she had imagined? What if, in her pursuit to protect the legacy of her grandmother, she had alienated them beyond repair? Her mind swirled with doubts, and for a moment Eliza questioned whether revealing her success had been a mistake. She turned her attention back to Uncle Jack, who was glaring at her now, his face a mask of forced civility. "You think you can just waltz in here and dictate what happens to this family?" His voice, though calm, was sharp with contempt. "You've always been the quiet one, the one who thought she was too good for the rest of us. But now you've crossed a line." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. His words stung more than she expected. She had never asked for their approval, but there had always been a part of her, small but persistent, that longed for acceptance, to be seen, truly seen, by the people she had once called family. But now that she had finally revealed who she was, they didn't seem to know how to respond. They were not impressed, not proud. They were threatened. Her eyes flicked to Jessica, her only ally, the only one who had ever understood her. But even Jessica's face was tense, as if she, too, wasn't sure where all of this was headed. It was as if the family she had spent so many years distancing herself from was now a part of her again in a way she couldn't quite control. Then, just as Eliza felt the ground shift beneath her, a new voice cut through the tension. One she hadn't anticipated. Veronica, usually the least vocal at family meetings, spoke up. "If Evelyn were here," she said, her tone unusually somber, "she would have been proud of you, Eliza. But this isn't the way to bring us together." Her words were measured, almost calculated, but there was something in them, an honesty that Eliza hadn't expected from her. For a brief moment, Eliza wondered if there was hope for reconciliation, but then as quickly as the thought came, it was gone. Veronica wasn't interested in healing old wounds. She was calculating how this would affect her position in the family, how Eliza's sudden rise could be leveraged for her own advantage. It wasn't the support Eliza had hoped for. It was just another strategy. The conversation continued, and Eliza's grip on her composure tightened. Her emotions were a swirl of pride, disappointment, and guilt. She had fought for her place in this family, but in doing so, had she created a rift too wide to bridge? The mansion, the very symbol of her grandmother's legacy, now felt like a prison. What had started as a simple desire to preserve something meaningful had turned into a battleground, one she wasn't sure she could win. Then, the moment she had dreaded finally arrived. Uncle Jack stood, his voice steely. "I propose we vote on this," he said, addressing the room. "It's clear where the majority stands. Let's not drag this out any longer." The room nodded in agreement, the weight of the decision pressing down on Eliza like a stone. Her heart raced. She had the documents, the power, the leverage, but it didn't feel like enough. In that moment, the true cost of her actions became clear. Winning this battle could cost her the very thing she had fought to protect, her family's respect. Have you ever fought so hard for something you believed in, only to realize the price of that victory was something you weren't ready to lose? Eliza's family is about to make a decision that will change everything. Will she preserve the legacy she's worked so hard for, or will her actions tear apart the very foundation she sought to protect? Eliza stood at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, her hands resting lightly on the edge as her family members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The weight of the moment pressed against her chest, but her resolve was firmer than ever. She had spent years building this. Everything she had, everything Evelyn had taught her, and now it was time to make them see. Uncle Jack, who had once held the mantle of power with such ease, now stood before her like a man who had realized he had lost something he couldn't quite grasp. The voting had begun, as expected, with Jack's supporters quick to voice their opinions. It was an easy decision for most of them. Sell the mansion, turn it into a luxury development, and split the profits. The vote was overwhelmingly in favor, the room erupting in murmurs of agreement, until the papers were passed to Eliza. She could feel their eyes on her, those cold, dismissive eyes that had so often made her feel like an outsider in her own family. She had always known they didn't understand her. But now, they would have to. She had expected the weight of their judgment, the sting of their disapproval. But what caught her off guard was the deep, unexpected sense of loss that gnawed at her. This wasn't just a family business meeting. It was the end of something. The end of the dream she had once carried, the dream that her family would come to understand her, would see her as more than the poor relation they had mocked for years. Instead, they were closing that door for good, and she had no choice but to walk away, leaving her grandmother's legacy in their hands. Her fingers trembled as she placed the documents on the table, the sleek leather portfolio sliding across the surface toward Jack. She met his gaze, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I've made my decision," she said, letting the silence settle in like a weight. "I am not voting for the sale, and I don't think it's in the best interest of this family to sell what truly matters for short-term gain." Jack's lips tightened, the corners of his mouth pulling back into a thin smile. "You really think you can stop this, Eliza? You've made your little fortune, but it's nothing compared to the bigger picture. You're out of your depth here." Eliza didn't flinch. She didn't need to. She had lived in that depth, worked in it, built her empire out of it. She had nothing to prove to him. Not anymore. "The bigger picture, Jack," she said, "is what we leave behind, not how much we make." She paused, her eyes scanning the faces of her cousins, the ones who had once mocked her, the ones who had laughed behind her back. "Your bigger picture is a collection of luxury items and trophies. Mine is a future that honors those who built this empire with purpose, with care, not with the need to show off." The room was silent again, but now the tension was different. The air was thick with realization. They knew what they had just heard. For the first time, the wealth they had flaunted seemed hollow. Eliza's calmness, her certainty, had unsettled them. She wasn't just a reflection of their failure anymore. She was the future, the silent force they had underestimated. And with it came something they hadn't expected, the knowledge that their greed had blinded them to the true value of what they had. Veronica shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her fingers tightening around her glass. "You can't possibly expect us to reverse this decision," she said, her voice a little too sharp. "We've already made our arrangements. You're not going to throw all of that away because of some sentimental notion of legacy." "Sentiment is the thread that ties us to who we were," Eliza replied softly, her voice echoing in the silence. "And it's the thread that keeps us from being consumed by what we could become." For a long moment, no one spoke. Eliza could feel her heartbeat thundering in her ears, but she didn't look away. This wasn't about winning a vote. It was about showing them the truth that they had never seen because they had never bothered to understand. Evelyn's legacy wasn't just a mansion or a name. It was the quiet strength that Eliza had learned to carry, the ability to hold on to something of real value even when the world around her seemed determined to make it disappear. Uncle Jack was the first to speak again, his voice clipped. "If you're not going to vote with us, then I suppose it's over." He gestured toward the stacks of papers on the table, dismissing her presence with a flick of his hand. "You can keep your little empire, Eliza, but it's not going to stop us from moving forward." But Eliza didn't leave. She didn't let their dismissal have the final say. Instead, she reached for the final document in her portfolio, the one she had kept hidden from them all. With a quiet sigh, she slid it across the table toward Jack. His eyes narrowed as he picked it up. His fingers brushed over the name at the top of the page, Elizabeth's Legacy Trust. "You think you can just—" Jack began, but his voice faltered as he scanned the document. The room grew deathly still. Eliza's heart beat louder than ever as the reality of what she had done sank in. The trust she had created, the one she had built from the ground up, now controlled a significant portion of the family assets, enough to halt any decision to preserve Evelyn's legacy. Even the mansion was safe. It was hers, legally and irrevocably. The family stared at her, mouths agape, eyes wide. For the first time they saw her, not just the poor cousin, but the woman who had risen from their mockery, who had built her future without needing their validation. The silence stretched, and it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was a weightlifting. They had underestimated her, but now they were seeing her, not as they had imagined, but as she truly was. Their equal. Their better. Aunt Catherine was the first to break the silence. Her voice was tight with a mix of awe and something Eliza couldn't quite place. You've outplayed us all, haven't you?" Eliza didn't respond. She didn't need to. The smile that curled at the corner of her lips was answer enough. She had won. Not just the mansion, not just the vote. She had won herself. Have you ever fought for something you believed in so fiercely, only to realize the true cost of that fight? Eliza's journey has come full circle. But will she find peace with the family she fought so hard to protect? Or is the cost of her victory greater than she ever imagined? The room was still, but for the first time, it felt like home. The fight wasn't over, but Eliza had already won the most important battle of all, the battle to stay true to herself. And that was enough.